The baby cried for 3 hours. His mother, Clara, sat 2 feet away and watched him. She was not sleeping, not sick, fully awake, back straight, eyes locked on his tiny face, watching him cry without moving a single muscle toward him. Rose delivered babies in Quail Village for 30 years. She stepped into the room and stopped walking. She never saw anything like this. Clara did not look up when Rose entered. She did not flinch. She sat like someone holding themselves together by sheer will, tears running freely down her face. Rose moved toward the baby to bring him to her. Clara shot to her feet and backed against the wall. Not in anger. Not in madness. In something that looked terrifyingly close to desperation. Like a woman stepping back from a fire she knows will consume her. But she did not leave the room. That one detail stayed with Rose long after that night. In 3 hours of her newborn screaming, Clara never left the room. Never looked away. Never covered her ears. She stayed close enough to reach him, but chose not to. That was not a woman who did not love her child. That was something else entirely. And Rose did not yet have the wisdom to understand. Clara was 19 years old when she married Samuel. Everyone in Quail said she was the quiet kind of beautiful. Not the kind that announced itself. The kind you noticed 3 days later and could not stop thinking about. She laughed rarely, but when she did, it arrived like something that saved itself for the right moment. Samuel was a fisherman. Patient, broad-shouldered, the sort of man who fixed things without being asked. He loved her simply and completely, the way uncomplicated people love. And Clara loved him back in the only way she knew how, which was quietly and with her whole self. When she became pregnant, the village celebrated. Samuel walked around for a week like a man who won something. Clara was happy too. But there was something underneath the happiness. Something tight and watchful. Like a woman waiting for a storm she alone could see coming. Nobody noticed. There was too much celebration to notice. The morning after the birth, the village already knew. Word traveled the way it always does in small places, fast and slightly wrong. By the time it reached the far end of the market, the story was that Clara looked at her son's face and screamed at Rose to take him away. By the time it reached the church, it was that she pushed the baby off the bed. By the time the elders heard it, it became something darker still. Rose did not correct any of it. She was too unsettled to find the right words. She went back the next morning and found Clara in the exact same position, sitting near the window, watching the baby from across the room, her face wrecked and her hands still. Rose asked her plainly what was wrong. Clara said nothing. Rose asked again. Clara turned to the window. That silence was the thing that cost Clara everything. The village council met that afternoon under the mango tree. 7 elders, 2 of them women, all of them certain they understood what was happening. A mother who refused her child was not a confused mother. She was a dangerous one. They saw this before, they said. Or their mother saw it. A woman who rejects her own baby in the first hours is either cursed or cursing. There was no third option. They decided to give her 3 days. If she did not hold the child by then, the baby would go to Samuel's sister to raise. And Clara would face the council again for a different kind of hearing. Samuel sat at the edge of the meeting and said nothing. He went to her the night before and she wept in his arms, and he held her and asked what was wrong and she said, "I cannot tell you," and he felt something in him go cold and quiet. He loved her without condition. But silence, in a moment that demanded explanation, felt to him like a door slamming. He did not go back to her that night. And Clara sat alone in the lamplight, 2 feet from her son, guarding him from herself. There was one person in Quail who did not join the council meeting that afternoon. Margaret. Margaret was 63 years old, a former church elder, a woman whose opinion carried more weight in that village than any official title. She was Clara's mother's closest friend. She sat at Miriam's bedside in those final weeks. And she alone, in all of Quail, knew exactly why Clara would not touch her son. Because she was the one who told her. Clara was 16 when Margaret sat her down in that small back room and delivered the message Miriam asked her to carry. Margaret did it with care, with love, with the full weight of a woman who promised a dying friend she would protect her daughter. She told Clara about the disease. She told Clara it could pass from mother to child. She told Clara to be careful. She did not tell Clara that touch alone could not transmit it. She did not know that herself. She had no medical training. She only had the words Miriam gave her, and Miriam was feverish and frightened and speaking quickly, and neither of them understood enough to ask the right questions. Margaret believed she was protecting Clara. She sat in the years since then and told herself she did the right thing. Now she sat outside her house while the village met under the mango tree, and she listened to them call Clara cursed, and she said nothing. She told herself it was not her place. She told herself Clara would explain when she was ready. She told herself many things that evening. None of them helped her sleep. Dr. Owen arrived in Quail on the second day, not for Clara, but for the malaria outreach program he ran twice a year through the valley villages. He was a quiet man, mid-40s, who worked in rural medicine long enough to know that the most important thing you could do in any village was listen before you spoke. He set up his table near the well. He saw 40 people that morning. He heard about the strange mother by noon. He did not go to her right away. He asked questions first. He asked Rose what she saw. He asked Samuel what Clara said. He asked the elder women what they believed. Then he went to see Clara. She was sitting in her usual place. The baby, little Thomas, was asleep in the cot. Clara watched him sleep with the specific expression of a person who is starving and sitting next to food they believe is poisoned. Dr. Owen sat down across from her. He did not introduce himself at length. He did not explain what he was there for. He simply sat and waited and looked at her the way a person looks at someone when they are genuinely trying to understand. Clara said nothing for a long time. Then Dr. Owen looked at her arms. There were small marks on the inside of her left forearm. Faint. Old. The kind of marks that told a story if you knew how to read them. He saw marks like that before, in a clinic in Moshi, on a woman who wept for different reasons. He asked Clara one question. And Clara broke open like something sealed for years under pressure. She was 8 years old when her mother, Miriam, got sick. Nobody told Clara what the sickness was. In Quail, that generation did not name certain things. They moved around the name the way you move around a crack in the floor. You knew it was there. You never stepped on it. Miriam grew thin, then thinner. She died when Clara was 11, and the village buried her quietly and said she was taken by God, and Clara went to live with her aunt. But before Miriam died, she asked Margaret to come to her bedside. Margaret knew Miriam for years. Miriam told her what the doctors in the city said. And then Miriam asked Margaret to do one thing. When Clara was old enough to marry, when Clara was old enough to have children, tell her. Tell her what I carried. Tell her to be careful. Margaret agreed. And Margaret told her. Clara was 16 when Margaret sat her down and explained that her mother died of a disease that could pass from mother to child. Margaret did not know the full science of it. She knew what Miriam told her and she repeated it the only way she could, in the plain blunt language of a woman trying to protect a girl she was afraid for. She told Clara the sickness passed through touch. Through blood. Through the closeness between a mother and a newborn in those first raw hours of life. She told Clara that if she ever had a child, she needed to be very careful. Then she left. And Clara was 16 and alone with that information, and she carried it for 3 years like a stone in her chest. She carried it through her courtship with Samuel. She carried it to her wedding. She lay awake in the early weeks of her pregnancy, pressing her hands against her stomach, loving the child growing inside her with a love that was already half grief. Because she believed that the moment she touched him, she would begin killing him. She did not tell Samuel because she did not know how to say it. I might be carrying the thing that killed my mother, and I might give it to our son, and I love you both too much to risk it. Some truths are too heavy to say out loud. So she carried it alone. And when Thomas was born and they placed him in front of her and she felt every cell in her body lunge toward him, she did the thing she believed love required. She pulled back. She stayed in the room because she could not bear to leave him. She would not leave him. But she would not touch him either. She sat 2 feet away and absorbed his crying like a punishment and told herself this was what a good mother did. A good mother chose her child's life over her own need to hold him. Dr. Owen listened to all of this without moving. Then he asked her when she last got tested. Clara looked at him. He asked again. She said never. No one ever tested her. Margaret told her she carried it. Margaret knew her mother. That was enough. Dr. Owen was quiet for a moment. Then he told her that the disease her mother most likely carried did not pass through touch. Clara did not understand. He told her again, gently and carefully. He told her that even in cases where a mother carried the virus and her child was at risk, there were protocols now, medicines, interventions. Skin-to-skin contact between a mother and her newborn was not the danger. A mother holding her child, pressing her lips to his forehead, breathing him in, none of that was how transmission happened. He told her that Margaret, who loved her and tried to protect her, told her something that was not fully true. Not out of malice. Out of the particular tragedy of half-knowledge dressed up as certainty. Clara sat very still. Outside, a bird called once and went quiet. Thomas made a small sound in his cot. Clara turned to look at her son, and something in her face shifted in a way that was painful to witness. It was the face of a woman realizing she suffered for 3 years, for a danger that did not exist the way she was told it did. Margaret was told that evening. Dr. Owen sat with her the same way he sat with Clara, patiently, and walked her through what he knew, and watched the old woman's face move through confusion, then resistance, then something that was not quite understanding but was close to it. And then Margaret remembered. She remembered sitting at Miriam's bedside. She remembered being frightened herself. She remembered that Miriam was feverish that day and speaking quickly, and that she was so focused on keeping the words to pass on to Clara that she never asked enough questions. She never asked the doctor. She never verified. She took a dying woman's terrified words and carried them, unchanged, to a 16-year-old girl and called it protection. She meant well. She caused enormous harm. Those two things sat side by side and neither one cancelled the other out. Margaret did not sleep that night. Sometime before dawn she rose, and walked across the village, and stood outside Clara's door, and did not knock. She stood there a long time. Then she sat down on the ground outside the door and stayed there until morning, because she did not know what else to do with what she was carrying. Clara found her there at sunrise. She looked down at this old woman, this woman who loved her mother, who tried to love her, who broke something in her without meaning to. She did not speak. She sat down beside her. They sat together in the early light and said nothing. It was not forgiveness yet, not quite. But it was the beginning of something. The first honest moment they shared since that afternoon when Clara was 16 and the world shifted under her feet. Clara held Thomas for the first time on the morning of the third day. Rose brought him to her. She placed the baby in Clara's arms and stepped back and watched. Clara held her son the way people hold things they almost lost, not gently but fiercely, with the specific grip of someone who understood what nearly happened. She pressed her face to the top of his head. She breathed him in. She made no sound for a long time. And then she made a sound that was not crying exactly, but was the thing that lives underneath crying, the thing that comes out when a person carries something so long that the body simply gives. Thomas stopped fussing the moment she took him. He simply stopped. As if some part of him, too small and new to understand anything, understood this. Samuel stood in the doorway. Rose sent for him and he came. He watched his wife hold his son for the first time and felt something collapse in his chest. The hardness that built since the night she refused to explain did not collapse into joy immediately. It collapsed into grief first. Grief for the 3 days. Grief for the silence between them. Grief for the fact that she carried something this enormous alone because she did not know how to hand it to someone. He would have to reckon with that. The ways he made himself unavailable to her fear. The questions he never pushed hard enough to ask. He loved her simply, and simple love, he was learning, was not always enough. Sometimes love needed to be insistent. Sometimes love needed to say, I am not leaving this room until you tell me what is breaking you. He crossed the room and sat beside her. He put his arm around her and she leaned into him and the three of them sat together in the early morning light, a family that nearly got destroyed not by wickedness, not by curse, but by the oldest and most human thing in the world. A truth that got lost on its way from one mouth to another. The village never fully understood what happened. The elder council was told simply that Clara suffered from a medical fear and that the fear was resolved. Some accepted this. Some did not. Quail was a village, and villages have long memories, and certain women clicked their tongues at Clara in the market for months afterward. Clara learned to ignore them. What she could not ignore was the weight of what she now knew about her mother. Miriam died alone in a way that did not have to be so lonely. Had there been proper information, proper language for what she carried instead of silence and shame, things might have been different. What was not survivable was the isolation. The not naming. The way the village moved around the truth until the truth became a wound nobody knew how to treat. Clara thought about this often, while nursing Thomas, while watching his face change week by week into something more distinctly his own. She thought about all the women in all the villages handed half-truths by people who loved them, who built entire lives of unnecessary suffering around those half-truths. She thought about her mother, who did the best she could with what little she had, and still left a splinter in her daughter's heart without meaning to. She forgave her. That forgiveness was not quick or clean. It arrived in pieces, over months. But it arrived. Thomas grew. He was a loud child, opinionated, with Clara's eyes and Samuel's laugh and an energy that exhausted everyone who loved him. Clara touched him constantly. She could not help it. She held his face in her hands when he cried. She pressed her lips to his forehead when he slept. She carried him on her back through the market and felt his weight against her spine and understood, fully and finally, what it meant to have a body that was simply glad to be alive. She was 2 feet away from him for 3 days. She spent the rest of her life making up the distance.